The boy stood outside the tall glass doors for a long moment, unsure if he should go in. The building looked too perfect, too polished, like a place where everything had a place and everyone belonged, except him. The reflection staring back at him from the glass only made him more aware of the difference. His shirt was clean but faded, the fabric worn thin from too many washes. His shoes had lost their color long ago, and the soles were beginning to separate slightly at the edges. Inside, warm golden lights filled the large hall. He could see people moving around, dressed in elegant clothes, their voices blending into a soft hum. Some laughed lightly, holding glasses in their hands, while others stood near the grand piano placed in the center of the room. It stood there like something sacred, shining under the lights, untouched. He swallowed slowly, his fingers tightening around the strap of his old bag. For a second, he thought about turning back. No one had invited him. No one was expecting him. It would be easier to walk away, to disappear like he usually did. But something inside him refused to move. His eyes stayed locked on the piano. It wasn't just an instrument to him. It was something more. Something that had followed him through quiet nights, through empty rooms, through moments when he felt like the world had forgotten him. Even from outside, he could almost hear its sound in his mind, soft and familiar. He took a small breath, then pushed the door open. The sound of the hall grew louder as he stepped inside. The air felt warmer, heavier somehow. For a moment, no one noticed him. People were too busy with their conversations, their laughter, their own worlds. He moved slowly, careful not to draw attention, keeping his head slightly lowered. His steps were quiet, almost cautious, as if he feared the floor itself might reject him. But it didn't take long. A woman near the entrance noticed him first. Her smile faded slightly as her eyes moved over his clothes. She leaned closer to the person beside her and whispered something. That person turned, looked at the boy, and gave a small, confused frown. Within seconds, a few more eyes shifted in his direction. He felt it immediately, that familiar feeling. The one he had known for years. Judgment. He kept walking, pretending not to notice, though his ears caught small pieces of whispered words. Is he lost? Who let him in? Does he even belong here? Each sentence landed quietly, but heavily. Still, he didn't stop. His focus stayed on the piano. The closer he got, the more out of place he felt. The people around it were dressed even more formally, their movements confident, their voices steady. Some of them stood near the instrument, talking about music, their words filled with knowledge and pride. The boy slowed his steps. For a brief moment, doubt crept in again. He could leave now. No one had stopped him yet. But his eyes moved to the piano once more, and something inside him held him in place. A soft memory passed through his mind, dim light, an old broken keyboard, the sound of uneven keys, and long hours spent alone, learning, repeating, trying again and again. No audience, no applause, just him and the music. That memory gave him enough courage to take another step. And then another. As he reached closer, the whispers became less quiet. A man near the piano glanced at him and raised an eyebrow. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but distant. The boy hesitated, his voice catching for a second. I just wanted to see," he said softly. The man looked at him for a moment longer, then gave a small nod, though his expression didn't fully soften. "Just don't touch anything," he added, turning back to his conversation. A couple of people nearby let out small, amused breaths, not quite laughter, but close. The boy nodded slightly, even though the man was no longer looking at him. He moved a little closer to the piano, stopping a few steps away. Up close, it looked even more beautiful. The surface was smooth and reflective, the keys perfectly aligned, untouched by dust or time. It felt like something from another world. His heart began to beat faster. For a moment, everything else faded, the people, the whispers, the room. It was just him and the piano. But reality returned quickly. A group standing nearby noticed how he was looking at it. One of them, a young man with a confident smile, tilted his head slightly. "You like the piano?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. The boy looked at him, unsure how to respond. Yes, he said quietly. The young man exchanged a glance with his friends. Do you play? He asked, this time with a slight smirk. A short silence followed. The boy's fingers tightened slightly at his sides. A little, he answered honestly. That was enough. A soft laugh escaped from one of the others in the group. Not loud, but clear enough. A little? Someone repeated. Another person chuckled. That's interesting. The boy felt his face grow warm, but he didn't look away. The young man stepped slightly closer, folding his arms. Well, he said casually, this isn't exactly a place for a little. More quiet laughter followed. The boy lowered his eyes for a moment. He had heard words like this before. Different places, different people, same meaning. For a second, the old feeling returned, the urge to shrink, to step back, to disappear. But then he looked at the piano again, and something changed. The fear didn't vanish completely, but it became smaller, quieter. He took a slow breath. I just want to try, he said, his voice soft but steady. That made the group pause. The young man raised his eyebrows slightly, surprised. Try? He repeated. A few more people nearby turned their attention toward them now, sensing something unusual. The room's soft noise began to shift. Not silent, but different, curious. The boy stood there, small and still, but something about him no longer felt as uncertain as before. He didn't move toward the piano yet. He just stood there, waiting, hoping. And despite the laughter, despite the whispers, despite the doubt in every eye around him, he didn't walk away. The boy remained standing near the piano, his quiet words still hanging in the air. For a moment, no one responded. The group that had been laughing exchanged looks, unsure whether to take him seriously or not. The young man with folded arms let out a small breath through his nose, almost like a short laugh. You want to try? He repeated, this time louder, enough for others nearby to hear. This piano isn't for practice. A few people around them smiled faintly, their interest growing. Some turned their bodies slightly, shifting their attention away from their conversations and toward the boy. The boy didn't answer right away. His eyes moved to the piano again, then back to the floor. He knew what they were thinking. He had seen it too many times in too many places. It wasn't new, but something inside him refused to step back. I won't take long, he said quietly. The young man tilted his head, studying him more carefully now. There was something unusual about the boy's calmness. It wasn't confidence in the usual sense, but it also wasn't fear. It was something quieter, something steady. Another voice joined in, this one from an older man standing a few steps behind. Let him, he said casually, though there was a hint of curiosity in his tone. It might be entertaining. A few soft laughs followed that word. Entertaining. The boy heard it clearly. Still, he didn't react. The young man shrugged slightly, stepping to the side as if the whole thing didn't matter much to him. Fine, he said. Go ahead. Just don't damage anything. The words carried a quiet warning, but also permission. That was enough. The boy nodded once, slowly. He stepped closer to the piano. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the entire room was watching him now. And in a way it was. Conversations had softened. People had begun to turn, drawn by the small scene unfolding near the center of the hall. He could feel their eyes, curious, doubtful, amused. He reached the piano bench and paused. Up close, it felt even more overwhelming. The polished surface reflected the lights above, almost blinding. The keys looked untouched, perfect in a way that made him hesitate. For a brief moment, his hand hovered in the air. Then he pulled it back. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Behind him, someone whispered, "He doesn't even know where to start." Another voice added, "This will be quick." A quiet chuckle followed. The boy closed his eyes for a second, and suddenly the grand hall disappeared. In its place came a small, dim room, a broken keyboard with uneven keys, the faint sound of wind slipping through a cracked window. Long nights spent alone, repeating the same notes until his fingers hurt. No audience, no laughter, no pressure, just music. His breathing slowed. The noise of the hall faded again, not completely, but enough. He opened his eyes. This time he didn't hesitate. He gently pulled the bench back and sat down. The movement was careful, almost respectful, as if he understood the value of what was in front of him better than anyone else in the room. A few people leaned in slightly, watching more closely now. The boy adjusted his position on the bench. His feet didn't fully reach the floor the way they should, but he didn't seem to mind. He placed both hands on his lap for a moment, staring at the keys. There was silence around him now. Not complete silence, but close. The kind that comes when people are waiting for something, even if they don't expect much. The young man who had first spoken stood nearby, arms still crossed, a faint smirk on his face. To him, this was still just a small distraction, something to pass the time. "Any time," he said lightly. A couple of people smiled again. The boy didn't respond. He slowly lifted his hands. His fingers hovered above the keys, not touching them yet. And then, they stopped, completely still. Seconds passed. From the outside, it looked like hesitation again. Like doubt. Like he might give up before even starting. Someone behind him sighed quietly. "See?" they whispered. "He can't do it." Another person shifted their weight, already losing interest. But the boy remained still. Inside, something deeper was happening. His mind was searching not for courage, but for something familiar. Something real. He wasn't thinking about the people behind him anymore. He wasn't thinking about the way they looked at him. He was listening, not with his ears, but with memory. A melody, soft and distant, began to form in his mind. Not perfect, not polished, but honest. His fingers lowered slightly, brushing the surface of the keys without pressing them. Another breath, slow, careful. Then finally, he pressed the first key. The sound was soft, almost too soft for such a large room. For a split second, it felt like nothing had changed. But the boy heard it, and that was enough. He pressed another key, then another. The notes were simple at first, gentle, almost uncertain. Behind him, someone shifted again, waiting for a mistake. It didn't come. The boy's fingers moved slowly, as if remembering each note rather than rushing through them. There was no show, no attempt to impress. Just sound. Just feeling. The room remained quiet, though not completely still. Some still expected it to fall apart at any moment. But it didn't. The boy's shoulders relaxed slightly. His breathing steadied. And his fingers began to move with more confidence. Still soft. Still careful. But no longer unsure. Something was beginning. And though most people didn't realize it yet, the laughter had already started to fade. The first few notes drifted into the room so softly that some people barely noticed them. They were simple, almost fragile, like something that could disappear if anyone spoke too loudly. A few in the crowd still shifted their weight, waiting for the moment it would fall apart. But it didn't. The boy kept playing. His fingers moved slowly at first, pressing each key with care, as if he was listening closely to every sound it made. There was no rush in him, no need to prove anything quickly. He let each note breathe, let it settle in the air before moving to the next. A woman near the back, who had been mid-conversation, paused without realizing it. The words she was about to say faded away as her attention slipped toward the piano. She didn't turn fully, not yet, but her ears stayed with the sound. Near the front, the young man who had first spoken still stood with his arms crossed. The faint smirk on his face remained, but it had softened just a little. He was listening now, even if he didn't want to admit it. The boy's playing began to change. The notes, once spaced apart and careful, started to connect. Pattern formed, gentle but clear. It was still simple, but it no longer felt uncertain. There was direction now, a quiet sense of purpose. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Wait." Another voice answered softly, "Is that?" They didn't finish the sentence. They just listened. The boy didn't look up. His eyes stayed on the keys, but not in fear anymore. It was focus, deep and steady. His shoulders, which had been slightly tense before, relaxed as his hands found their rhythm. The melody grew, not louder at first but deeper, carried something in it, something that didn't come from practice alone. There was a feeling behind each note, something real and unfiltered. It wasn't perfect in a technical way, but it didn't need to be. Felt honest. The soft murmurs in the room began to fade. More people turned. A couple who had been walking toward the exit slowed down, then stopped entirely. They looked at each other for a brief second before turning toward the piano, drawn in without quite knowing why. The boy's fingers moved more freely now. What had started as hesitation had turned into quiet confidence. He no longer paused between notes. The melody flowed, rising and falling like a calm wave. The young man near the piano uncrossed his arms. He didn't realize he had done it. His eyes were fixed on the boy's hands now, watching the way they moved. Not randomly, not nervously, but with intention. With understanding. "That's not," he murmured under his breath, though he didn't finish the thought, because he didn't need to. The room was changing. The laughter that had once filled small corners had completely disappeared. In its place was something else. Something heavier. Tension. Respect, though not fully formed yet. The boy pressed a sequence of notes that carried a sudden shift in emotion. It wasn't loud, but it was powerful in a quiet way. Like a memory surfacing without warning. A man standing near the side straightened slightly, his expression changing. The sound had caught him off guard. There was something familiar in it, something that reached deeper than he expected. The boy leaned slightly closer to the piano. Not because he needed to, but because he felt it. The music wasn't just something he was playing anymore. It was something he was inside of. Each note seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the room, beyond the polished floor and bright lights. Came from his life, from quiet nights, from empty spaces, from moments no one else had seen. And somehow the room could feel that. A woman near the front slowly lowered the glass in her hand, her eyes no longer moving away from the boy. She didn't speak. She didn't even shift. She just listened. The melody began to grow stronger. The boy's fingers moved faster now, but not carelessly. There was control in every movement, a quiet strength. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was telling something, without words. The young man took a small step closer to the piano. Then another. He didn't even notice he was doing it. His earlier confidence had faded into something else. Something uncertain, something thoughtful. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered to himself. But it did. It just wasn't what he expected. The boy's expression remained calm, but his eyes held something deeper now. Not fear. Not doubt. Feeling. His fingers pressed the keys with more intensity, and for the first time, the sound began to rise. Not sharply, but steadily, filling more of the room. The grand piano responded beautifully, its voice rich and full. Now everyone could hear it clearly, and no one was speaking. A silence had taken over the hall. Not an empty silence. Full one. The kind that holds people still. The kind that makes them listen without distraction. The boy moved into another part of the melody, one that felt softer again, almost like a quiet reflection after something heavy. His hands slowed slightly, but the emotion remained. It didn't fade. It stayed. A person near the back, who had once laughed, now stood completely still, their expression unreadable. The smile was gone. In its place was something closer to surprise, and something else they couldn't quite name. The boy's breathing stayed even. His body no longer felt small in the large room. At the piano, he didn't look out of place anymore. He belonged there, even if no one had expected it. Even if no one had invited him. The music continued, each note carrying more weight than the last. And somewhere in the room, someone quietly realized they had been wrong. Not just about the boy, but about what they thought they understood. The young man finally lowered his gaze for a moment, as if thinking. The smirk that had once been so easy on his face was completely gone now. When he looked back up, his expression had changed. He wasn't amused anymore. He was listening. just like everyone else. And the boy kept playing, unaware of how deeply the room had begun to change around him, or perhaps aware, but no longer caring. Because for the first time since he had walked in, he wasn't playing for them. He was simply playing. The music did not stop. It deepened. The boy's fingers moved with a quiet certainty now, as if they already knew where to go before touching each key. The melody that had started softly was no longer fragile. It had grown into something full, something alive. It filled the room. Not loudly, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that held it without effort. The grand hall, once full of scattered voices and small laughter, had fallen completely still. Even the smallest movements seemed to pause, as if no one wanted to disturb what was happening. The boy leaned slightly forward, his focus unbroken. His hands moved across the piano with a balance of strength and care. There was emotion in every note, but it was controlled, shaped into something that made sense without needing words. A man near the front slowly sat down on a nearby chair, not because he was tired, but because his legs no longer felt steady. His eyes remained fixed on the boy, his expression distant, as if the music had taken him somewhere else. The melody shifted again. It grew stronger. There was a weight to it now, something that pressed gently against the chest of anyone listening. It wasn't heavy in a painful way, but it carried depth, like a story unfolding piece by piece. The boy's face remained calm, but his eyes held something more. A quiet intensity, a memory, a feeling that could not be seen, only heard through the music. He pressed a series of notes that rose slightly, then fell like a voice trying to speak and then holding back. It was subtle but powerful. A woman standing close to the piano felt her breath catch. She didn't know why. The sound had reached something inside her without asking permission. Around her, others felt it too. No one spoke. No one moved. The young man who had first mocked the boy stood only a few steps away now. His posture had completely changed. His arms hung loosely by his sides, his earlier confidence replaced by something quieter. His eyes followed the boy's hands, trying to understand what he was seeing. This isn't just playing, he thought, though he didn't say it out loud, because it wasn't. It was something else. The boy's fingers moved faster for a moment, not rushed, but with purpose. The sound grew fuller, reaching every corner of the hall. The piano responded with a richness that seemed almost too much for such a small figure sitting before it. Yet he handled it effortlessly, as if he had always belonged there. The melody carried a sudden shift. Stronger now, more open, as if something long held inside was finally being released. It wasn't loud in a harsh way, but it was clear, impossible to ignore. A man near the back closed his eyes briefly, letting the sound wash over him. He didn't understand why it affected him so deeply, but he didn't try to resist it. The boy's shoulders lifted slightly with the movement of his hands, then relaxed again. His body followed the rhythm naturally without thinking. This was no longer about the room, or the people, or the whispers that had once surrounded him. This was his space now. The music softened again, gently pulling back after the stronger moment. It didn't lose its emotion. If anything, it became more personal, more honest. Each note felt like a quiet confession, a story told without explanation. The woman who had lowered her glass earlier now held it completely still. She had forgotten it was even in her hand. Her eyes remained fixed on the boy, her expression softened by something she couldn't quite describe. A quiet understanding passed through the room. Not spoken, not shared through words, but felt. They had been wrong. Not just in a small way, in a deeper way. They had looked at him and decided what he could be, what he could not be, without ever giving him a chance. And now they were listening to something they could not deny. The boy moved into another part of the melody, one that felt almost hopeful. It wasn't bright or cheerful, but it carried a sense of quiet strength, like someone standing again after falling. His fingers slowed slightly, giving each note more space, more meaning. The hall seemed to breathe with him. No one dared to interrupt. Even the smallest sound, a footstep, a shifting chair, felt too loud in comparison to the music. The young man lowered his head for a moment, his gaze falling to the floor. There was something in his expression now that hadn't been there before. Regret. It was subtle but real. When he looked back up, he didn't see the boy the same way anymore. He saw something else. Someone else. The boy's hands moved toward the higher keys, the sound becoming lighter, almost delicate again. It felt like the closing of something, though it hadn't ended yet. The melody circled gently, repeating a soft pattern that felt familiar, as if it had been there from the beginning. But now it carried more meaning, because now they understood. Or at least they were beginning to. The boy's face remained focused, but there was a calmness in him that hadn't been there before. The nervousness, the hesitation. It had all faded into the music. He was no longer the boy who had walked in unsure of himself. At the piano, he was something else entirely. Something whole. The music rose one last time, not sharply, but with quiet strength. It gathered everything that had come before, the softness, the depth, the emotion, and held it together for a brief moment. Then slowly, it began to fall. The notes softened, one by one, like a gentle goodbye. The boy's fingers slowed, pressing each key with care, as if he didn't want to let it end too quickly. The room remained still. No one moved. No one spoke. They were all waiting, even if they didn't realize it. Waiting for the final note. And when it came, it lingered in the air, soft and clear. The boy's hands rested on the keys for a moment longer. Then gently he lifted them. And in that quiet space between the end of the music and the world returning, no one dared to break the silence. The final note faded slowly, as if it did not want to leave the room. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The boy's hands hovered just above the keys before he gently lowered them into his lap. His shoulders rose and fell with a quiet breath, but his face remained calm. He did not look up right away. The silence in the hall felt different now. It was no longer filled with doubt or quiet judgment. It was something deeper, something heavier, the kind of silence that comes when people feel more than they can easily express. No one moved. The people who had once whispered now stood completely still, as if even the smallest sound would break something fragile in the air. The young man near the piano stared at the boy, his expression no longer carrying even a trace of amusement. His eyes were steady, thoughtful, almost unsure. It was as if he was trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. But it hadn't really been quick. It had just been unexpected. A woman near the front slowly let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her fingers tightened slightly around the glass in her hand before she carefully set it down on a nearby table, afraid the sound might feel too loud. Still, no one spoke. The boy finally lifted his gaze. Not toward the crowd at first, but toward the piano itself. His eyes moved across the keys, as if he was saying something quietly to them, something only he understood. There was no smile on his face, but there was peace, a kind of quiet satisfaction that didn't need approval. He slowly pushed himself up from the bench, his movements careful and unhurried. The bench made a faint sound as it shifted back into place, and for a moment, that small noise felt louder than anything else. A few people blinked, as if waking from a dream. The spell, whatever it had been, was beginning to loosen. The boy stood beside the piano now, small against its size, but no longer overshadowed by it. He turned slightly, finally facing the room. Dozens of eyes met him, but they were not the same eyes as before. The judgment was gone. The quiet laughter had disappeared. In its place was something else, respect, and something closer to regret. A man near the back straightened his posture, his expression serious now. The woman who had been watching closely pressed her lips together, her gaze soft but steady. Even those who had not paid much attention before now seemed fully present, fully aware. The young man stepped forward without thinking. He stopped a few feet from the boy, his voice caught somewhere between speaking and staying silent. For a moment he didn't know what to say. The words he had used earlier no longer fit. They felt wrong now, so he said nothing, and that somehow said enough. The boy didn't wait for anything, not for words, not for reactions. He gave a small, almost unnoticeable nod, not directed at anyone in particular, but more like an acknowledgement of the moment itself. Then he turned. Just like that. No hesitation. No pause for applause. He began to walk away from the piano. At first, the room remained silent, still caught in that lingering feeling. But then, a single clap came from somewhere near the center of the hall. Soft at first, almost uncertain. A man lowered his hands slowly after the sound, as if testing whether it was the right thing to do. Another clap followed. Then another. Within seconds, the sound began to grow. More hands came together, the rhythm building naturally, not forced. The applause spread across the room, filling the space where silence had lived just moments before. But this was not the same kind of sound that had been there earlier in the evening. This wasn't light or casual. It was real, carried weight, meaning. The boy paused for a fraction of a second when the sound reached him. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough. He didn't turn back. He didn't bow. He simply stood still for that one quiet moment, then continued walking. The applause grew louder, stronger. Some people stepped slightly forward, as if they wanted to say something, to stop him, to ask him who he was, where he had learned to play like that. But no one moved fast enough. And maybe, deep down, they knew it wasn't the moment for questions. The boy walked the same way he had entered. Calm, quiet, unnoticed, at least the way he had expected to be. But this time, every step he took was watched. Not with doubt, but with understanding. The young man remained where he stood, his hands slowly coming together with the rest of the room. His applause was steady, but his face held something else. Quiet realization. He looked at the piano, then toward the boy's retreating figure. For the first time, he understood how quickly he had judged someone without knowing anything about them, and how wrong he had been. Around him, others felt the same. The laughter from earlier now felt distant, almost embarrassing. A woman near the front lowered her gaze briefly, shaking her head slightly as if questioning her own thoughts from before. The man who had called it entertaining earlier now stood with a serious expression, his hands moving slowly as he clapped, his eyes fixed on the door the boy was approaching. The applause continued, but it no longer felt like something meant to impress or to be heard. It felt like something offered, something given, an acknowledgement, a quiet apology. The boy reached the door. He placed his hand on it, just as he had done before. For a brief second he paused. Not because he was unsure, but because he felt it. The difference. He opened the door and stepped outside. The sound of applause softened as the door closed behind him, fading into the distance. Outside, the air felt cooler, quieter. The world beyond the hall was unchanged, simple, ordinary, familiar. He took a few steps forward, away from the building, his pace steady. No one followed him. No one called out. And he did not look back. Inside the hall, the applause slowly began to fade. People lowered their hands one by one, the sound dissolving into a quiet stillness once again. But it was not the same stillness as before. Something had shifted. Something had stayed. The piano remained in the center of the room, untouched again, but it no longer felt like just an object. It felt like a reminder of what they had witnessed, of what they had misunderstood. The young man exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair before looking around the room. For once, he had nothing to say. No clever remark. No easy comment. Just silence. And thought. The guests began to move again, slowly returning to their conversations. But their voices were quieter now. Softer. Different. Because something about the evening had changed them, even if only a little. And somewhere outside, the boy continued walking, his figure growing smaller with each step. He carried nothing new with him. No recognition. No praise. No need for either. Because what mattered had already happened. He had played. And for a brief moment, he had been heard.